All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is Vince Hordeman with Clint Hordeman. We're Select Basketball. And today we are going to be talking about the shoe circuit. We're going to be talking about what it takes to play on the circuit, what it is, and then compare that to independent circuits. So we're looking forward to getting into some of these details. Before we do us a favor. And if you could go in and just subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. It helps us a lot. It helps us do other things with the channel. And then, of course, if you know of anybody that might be interested in the shoe circuit or independent circuits, anybody that's playing AAU basketball that might be interested, feel free to share this information with them. We'd love to get the information in their hands. So having said that, we are going to jump now into the shoe circuits. And, you know, everybody hears about these. If you play AAU basketball, you know what the shoe circuits are. They're the Nike, they're the Adidas, and the Under Armour, and they bring in the best players from all over. And you hear all about the gear and the teams getting paid to be there, and the college is doing all the recruiting. And so we wanted to dive into that because what we hear a lot of times is a lot of misconceptions about what these shoe circuits are and are not. And we just wanted to clear up some of those things. Hopefully that will help people when they're making better decisions on what they want to do moving forward. When we get back to a normal time when these things are happening. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they were, and then even what they're probably going to end up being from what you're hearing. Yeah. And we'll go from there. So first and foremost, let's talk about what are the shoe circuits versus what are independent tournaments.
Okay, and help me as we go here. So first of all, the shoe circuits, essentially that's Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour created circuits in order to get essentially the best players all in one area to compete against each other, and to be quite frank, to get them in their shoes and gear and travel gear, knowing that one, there's going to be some of the best players in the country that are wearing those, and that other people, younger players, people that are on the come up and peers are seeing them on those great players and saying, man, I want to wear those same shoes, or I want those same shorts, whatever. And it's a really it's a nationwide deal, but there's obviously players from across the country, and they're kind of whatever region they're in, they're again going from spot to spot and competing against the best other teams and areas and best players. So I think the original design was honestly to make the best and most elite competition, as well as get those players in those various shoes, whether it be Under Armour, Nike, or Adidas. So it's very, very competitive amongst the different teams, amongst those shoe companies, but also, who's trying to land those players, in some of these very basketball, high tradition areas. These different teams are competing to get those kids on their team and in those shoes. Yep. When you were mentioning, with regards to them getting paid, essentially the programs are receiving money to ensure that those teams go to these different events, and they can essentially use that money how they see fit, as long as they're attending those events. One thing, this is a really fun project for me, just kind of following up with a lot of things that I had heard and seen, and so just some of the things I heard were quite vague, even with people that are in that world. They didn't want to divulge too much information, which I don't blame them. Yeah. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about and what we're talking about is what I'm hearing, and sometimes you'll talk to 3 or 4 different programs and they'll tell you slightly different things. So, from program to program, probably it's a little bit different, and from shoe circuit to shoe circuit within those, they may be a little different, but the gist is the same. Okay. Is them trying to get that. And you mentioned versus like an independent program or independent tournaments. That's where the tournaments that aren't affiliated with any shoe company, majority of programs aren't necessarily affiliated with a particular shoe or whatever. They may all purchase, a Nike or Adidas or Under Armour uniform or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're invited and playing on these high level circuits. But they do have the freedom to pick where they want to go. And again, they're not set up where they're playing in, Dallas one weekend, LA one weekend, Atlanta one weekend, or whatever. They kind of can determine where they want to go and what they want to do.
Okay. And if you have questions, and you probably saw me, we're taking comments. If you have questions, comments, throw them into the YouTube chat, and we will be monitoring those. And so, yeah, you talk about the shoot circuits is a circuit. It's basically a season where teams would travel to one location. They play a set games. It's almost like a showcase type environment. And then the best teams at the end would move on to a finals. They're all a little bit different. So that's a general summary, but as opposed to independent where you can pick and choose where you want to go. You have to be in Atlanta, you have to be in Minneapolis, whatever the case may be per their contract. So that's kind of a general overview of what they are. Why is it that players want to be on the shoe circuit?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's the best competition out there in general. I mean, for the most part, you're seeing the best of the best competing against each other. I think also the fact that it's paid for a lot of programs, and we'll get into the different kind of tiers, so to speak, of that later. But if you're on one of those top tier, top 24, 32 teams within those different shoe company paid events, that's the best competition out there, which means what follows that? Scouts, college coachings, etc. So I think and of course the appeal of the gear. I mean, every basketball players traditionally love their gear. So, they get kind of the pick of the best and the latest and greatest. So that's another perk that comes along with that.
Well, and it's no accident that these shoe companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on their marketing,
correct,
in order to present this atmosphere of elite competitors and all that. And you see it; these things are chock full of the high majors, correct, mid majors. I mean, it's legitimate competition. So you can kind of see why a player would want to be on that. How about the AAU programs themselves? What is the appeal? What is drawing a program or even an independent team to want to play on a shoe circuit?
I think a couple of things. One, obviously, a check doesn't hurt. Someone helping you, a shoe company, sure, writing a check to your program and saying, "Hey, we'd love to have you come to our different events and participate." And then competition's another big one. Obviously, we're all competitors, and you want to match yourself up against the best if possible. This allows you to do so. So if you're on the East Coast and you're going, man. This weekend, I'm competing against the best players on the West Coast or in the Midwest or whatever. So it allows for you to compete and see where you stack up against everybody else in the country. Mm-hmm. So I think those are to me, that's the big appeal as from a program standpoint.
Okay. So let's jump into now probably what everybody's really wanting to hear is some of the misconceptions that we have found that people tend to believe, sometimes correct, sometimes maybe not correct. So let's start out with some of the misconceptions. One of the first ones, let's talk about all the expenses are paid for. So you hear, well, if I play on the shoe circuit, all my expenses will be paid for and I'm taken care of. Talk about the realities of that.
Okay, so first of all, not all of these programs are taken care of to the same extent. And what I mean by that is, financially speaking, not every team is getting the same check. And that goes across the board from the EYBL to Adidas to Under Armour or whatever. And then one of the big things is there's a big difference between those top tier, like the UA Association is a lot different than the UA Rise. The Adidas, the Gauntlet is, has different tiers, such as the gold and then the silver. Some of which are again are fully funded and are being able to take you wherever you go. Others, essentially, you're paying for your travel, you're paying for your gear, and there's a lot of different. There may be some discounting when it comes to the gear and entry fees, but it's not the package. It's 1/100th of the package, if not more, than these top tier teams are getting. So you're coming to the table with a lot of money. And so it's, again, the one misconception is like, oh, if I get on there, everything's paid for. Well, maybe, but it depends on what team you're on. It depends on what, if you're on the top tier or middle bottom. And then also you got to think, if you're traveling and it's going to the East Coast or whatever, I mean, there's obviously a lot of money that's involved there from your own personal pocket that's coming into this. So it's not all teams are the same. And I think that when you hear, oh, that team's on the Gauntlet, they may have gotten invited, or they're on the UA Rise, or they're on whatever. They may have gotten invited to the second tier or whatever type of tournament. That doesn't mean that they're getting all the same benefits. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, and even within some, from what I've understood, it's, you look at the top teams. Yeah, they're covered. Obviously, and we'll talk about why certain teams get picked up and why others don't. But even with some that are playing in those tops, are still having to come up with a lot of that money either through the players and families themselves, or they go out and they pick up an alumnus that maybe now plays in the NBA, can pitch in for the rest of it. But it's not all taken care of by the shoe circuit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And then now, obviously, the gear. We talk about it. We see all the gear. The kids are wearing the Nikes and the Adidas and the Under Armour stuff, and it looks awesome. And everybody talks about it. And I want that gear. And I think the misconception that we hear a lot of too is these players on the circuit, they get just tons and tons of gear. Everything's free. Everything's covered. And again, maybe yes, but sometimes, more often than not, no.
It's just like players in the NBA. You know, obviously the highest top tier players are getting more perks than the bottom, player in 10, 11, 12. Some are getting the latest and greatest, even stuff that hasn't even come out yet. But trust me, if you're in that world, you're in that world. If for a majority of these teams, for a majority of these different players and teams, they are getting maybe some team gear, some baseline gear. But it's, again, not all are treated the same. And I think, again, when I talk to kids that bring it up, like, hey, they're going to get all this. Yes and no. There's catches to a lot of this as well, where they're like, yeah, we'll give you 10 pairs, but if you want to get to a second level, you have to buy those second set. Yeah, we're going to give you the home jerseys, but you're going to have to pay for the away, etc. But if you're one of those top elite best teams in the country, I mean, they're taking care of all that for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So on the player side, that was some of the gear and the money questions. The other thing we hear a lot about is college coaches are going to go and watch every single game on the circuit. The reality is,
college coaches are going to watch the players that they feel that they can get. And so let's say, for instance, that there is a tournament. Now, first of all, the difference between, like, again, one of those top tier, Under Armour's top teams and kind of more of a secondary situation, all those coaches that may be going to watch those top tier players, they may not even be in the same city. That second tier may not even be in the same town as the top tier players. The bottom line is, college coaches are going to watch players that, again, they feel like they can get, that are in their network, that they've been recruiting, as long as it's within budget. And let me take that a step further. If you're a low major D1, a D2 in NAIA, and that's what level of college you are, and you're recruiting certain players, and you end up going all the way to the East Coast or something, I mean, most of those schools, if they're having to travel a long distance, they can't foot the bill for that. They don't have the budget to do that. So they're just not even going to go watch it play.
Meaning, if you're a West Coast school, you wouldn't go to the East Coast. And if you're an East Coast school, you wouldn't go to the West Coast, unless you are a high major or a mid-major program that can do that.
Yes, of course. And so, you know what I mean? And they're going to watch those kids that they already have in their network. If you're going, you know what I mean? If you're a college coach and you're in that top tier bracket, you're probably, you may be sitting there watching a game and you may see somebody and pick up and notice, but the odds of you leaving that main gym to drive over to some back gym or some other location is pretty far-fetched. I talked to a lot of colleges this week about it, and they've got to take a sniper approach to this. They've got to make sure that they're going directly to the player that they're trying to watch. It's going to be really difficult for them to try and just go out there, and especially if they're from a region that's not in that area, they don't have the time and the resources to go over there and just check it out and just see if they can find out, when they know how expensive it will be to recruit you. You're talking about going to the East Coast and saying, hey, I'm going to try and get that guy to I'm going to get him on a visit. Well, what if you don't get him? You're spending all that time, energy, and money for a kid that is more than likely going to play in that region,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Just fiscally, they got to be a lot, plan that out a lot more. Again, to the flip side of that is if you're a high major, or a mid-major kid, they a lot of times go more nationally. But I also know that those colleges have the resources. If you're a kid that's going to go to, a high major school, a Power 5 conference, it doesn't matter where you're playing. If you're playing in Seattle or you're playing in Tallahassee, those coaches are going to come find you and watch you.
And that kind of goes into the fourth misconception, which is if you are at a certain level, but then all of a sudden you play on the circuit, all of a sudden your recruiting is going to explode and you become almost a different player.
Again, we've done several of these videos, and the one common theme that we have is that your level of college is what it is. Getting more exposure across the country isn't going to change your level. It may change how many schools may see you and want to call you, but it's not all of a sudden going to mean you're going to go from this level and just explode to this one. One thing that's difficult if you're on a top tier, program is if you somehow get buried into the 8th, 9th, 10th guy on that team, or maybe you would be a standout on a different team that's playing more regionally, you may actually cost you opportunities because you're not getting to do your role. You're not getting to play, the minutes, the meaningful minutes that college coaches want to see. So just like anything else, really look at the whole situation and think it through as to, okay, what am I going to be doing out here? What is my role going to be on this team? Is it going to be that role? Because again, if you're on a team with a bunch of high major guys and you're maybe not at that level, you're going to have that role. You're not going to be the guy with the ball in your hands. Those other guys are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we talked a little bit about oftentimes if you're at one of those circuit tours and you're watching a team, you'll usually have 3 or 4 dominant players and then other guys that or girls even that are sort of sitting back in a lower role, where if they were playing on more of an independent type deal, it may be a better fit because from 1 to 8 or 1 to 10 on that team, everybody has to play many meaningful minutes and contribute. And it's not just dominated by one. There is going to be still better players, but it's a better fit. We've seen this so many times where kids were really good on the independent and they decided I'm going to go and try something else. And it just, sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not, but it's about finding the fit, I think. And
no question. I even take it a step further is that even from independent to independent, everybody, I think they always think the grass is always greener, but when they switch for, teams, whatever that may be, it's not a good fit because maybe they already have a player that plays your position that they like or has been around. I mean, it can make it to where, you're giving up something that's pretty dang good and going to something that maybe is sexier, but doesn't fit what your goals are. So you really, again, it's going back to just thinking it through with the right people, talking it through with the right people and coming to the right conclusion for you. Because it has a lot of pros and cons to all this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And now we've been talking about how things had been 2019. It's a new world today. You found out information on what may happen this year with shoe circuit. So maybe try to give a summary on what you're hearing. Obviously, none of this is set in stone. We don't even know what's going to happen the rest of this year. But what are you hearing as far as the shoe circuits are concerned and where they may be going in the future?
I mean, it's totally up in the air. Honestly, it looks like they're going to move back their recruiting calendar and keep that on pause until mid-April. Which means they're only going to have to condense things if they do decide they're going to and make changes if they do decide to get things going after that point. But quite frankly, as we all know, there's going to have to be major changes in the COVID world in order for any sort of NCAA recruiting to happen. It's just it's a tough situation right now. And but I know and what I heard missing this year was obviously big, and they want to get things rocking and rolling again from all standpoints. That circuit or independent.
Sure.
But honestly, they're one of the things that's been a common thread over the last few years there's been pulling back on the number of paid teams. That doesn't mean they're not going to have those secondary. I've seen growing numbers potentially in the kind of secondary tier of shoe circuit basketball. But I feel like the top tiers, they've seemed to be paring back numbers as opposed to expanding to more teams. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And the second tiers, we're going to talk, because it may sound like, oh, well, geez, if I can't be on the shoe circuit, or even if I am, maybe it's not as good as it could be. The truth is this: the shoe circuit represents about 1% of the players. I mean, they are the best of the best. We don't play on any of the shoe circuits, and we found a lot of success through independent tournaments. And there's a lot of advantages to playing on independent tournaments. So I think let's spend a little time talking about the independents.
Okay.
Why they are beneficial really for the other 99% of us that are maybe looking at, maybe we have a couple of D1s, a lot of NAI, just solid players, but legitimately can play in college. Why are the independents so good for programs like us and even smaller programs?
Well, first of all, a lot of what's going on with the shoe circuit stuff is out of our hands, right? So in other words, it's one of those where you have to be selected to be a part of that. I know you can put information in, but they're going to start you off where you're, giving you very limited resources, if any, and then you're going to have to essentially pay to travel and can be contractually obligated to go and play in certain events, which does a few things. It makes it so you're not in control of your own locations and destinies, so to speak. You can play in more tournaments, you can play in less tournaments. You get to determine what region that you want to play in. I think one of the biggest things is for us is just our players want to play, somewhat in the West. If you were to go through and talk to the majority of the players that we work with, they would like to stay on the Western side of the United States, Midwest or West. So for groups over on this side of the country to travel all the way to Atlanta or Virginia or something like that, it's very expensive to play in front of the majority of coaches that can find a lot of the guys that you're seeing here right in their own backyard that are less expensive to recruit, that they have tighter networks with, so playing on this side. Plus, and we've said this a lot, which is if you're a really good player and coaches are following you, they're going to meet you where you're at. So if in other words, if you're in Seattle or you're in Vegas and they're genuinely recruiting you, they're going to come watch you play, as long as it's within budget, right? So and here's the reality is there are a lot, and I could give you an amazing list of unbelievable independent programs that have 2 to 4 Division I players, and the rest of those guys are top tier NAI D2 players that make it extremely competitive, that can go toe to toe with a lot of the shoe team companies and beat them, and be really competitive with them. But again, have chosen to say, listen, I don't really want to go down that path. I want to go in my own direction, and I want to stay in our region. And so anyways, I know that's a long explanation for just having that control is big, is a big deal.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because you control expenses. You really tailor your program to what your players need, and you can shape that each year as opposed to being locked into, well, we have to go here. I know you have no chance or interest in playing over in this part of the country, but we have to go there. So it does give you the opportunity to set things up the way you want to. And I think the other part of it is the competition is still outstanding when you get to that top level. And the big part, I think, of finding the right independent tournaments to go to is doing what you do, which is you talk to the other directors that are also independent and go, hey, where are you going this year? What are you guys doing? What works for you? And then you plan what's going to work, and the tournaments that maybe won't, and you plan accordingly.
I think that they're just like in everything. There's a tight network of college coaches, AAU coaches with college coaches, AAU coaches with other AAU coaches. So there's some really great guys that we talk to quite often that we're saying, hey, where are you guys headed? Where should we all go together? Because if we can stay together, we still can control our schedule, and then we're making it really, really competitive. Not to downplay this part of it, or make it too big. If you're a kid, let's say that can go to BYU and you are in this region that we're in, the Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, or BSU or whatever, there is your outliers. But for the most part, if you're good enough and they are recruiting you, if you're playing in Vegas, they're going to come watch you play. And if you're on the shoe circuit and you're in Atlanta, they're going to go watch you play, right? So regardless of where you're going, if you're good enough and you fit that program, and they're going to go see you play. And then to take it even a step further, if you're a high major, again, you are playing on the shoe circuit because you want that experience and compete against the best of the best. But if you're good enough to play at Duke or Kentucky or Gonzaga or one of those schools, you don't need to play on the shoe circuit. They've heard, trust me, they know your name, they know where you live, and they are going to recruit you whether you're playing on the best shoe circuit team or the best independent team in the country. Yeah, if that makes sense.
And that goes back to we did a video on scouting services, and there's ranking services and all that. And I always joke, we always think it's funny, like when LeBron James plays, you don't need a scouting service or a ranking service to know, yeah, he's really good and he should be playing at a high level. Those ones are easy. So yeah, if you're at that level, if you're at a high major level, it's not that you need the circuit or a specific independent or even a certain team. If you've got that talent, you're probably going to end up wherever you should end up. It's not like you're going to fall through the cracks. Even I would argue, even in a COVID type year, if you're 6'8", shoot it, can jump, run fast, and you have the IQ, like they know.
No question.
They know. And so we should also say that, and I know you're gonna jump into something I want to say real quick. If you don't mind, if you could just subscribe to the channel real quick, just give us a click and we'd appreciate that. But yeah, finding those players, sometimes it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's no brainer.
Yeah. And again, that all comes down to fit for a lot of those, top 10 players in the country. For them, they think, and I don't blame them, that the fit is to play on a shoe circuit team and get the gear and the whatever and all that and travel around the country. Because at that level, you're playing for the experience, right? Like the experience of actually doing this and trying to get better. And if you're having a great experience with a different group that's not on the shoe circuit, then stick with that. I guess my point is, when you're at that level, it really is irrelevant where you're at. They're going to find you no matter what.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add on the shoe circuit versus independent. Hopefully this was helpful.
The one last thing, I think, one of the big things I know a lot of people are curious on how would I get on one? I get that question. How do we get on one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dive into that.
How do I get on one as a player? How does a team get on as a group? And
what are they looking for? What is the circuit looking for?
And so from what I've gathered, one, they're obviously looking for the high major players. They're looking for those potential NBA guys. They're looking for the guys that are the most popular out there, that have the most followers and subscribers that move the needle, right? So you watch this unbelievable talent and that has all these followers, and he's wearing this particular shoe. Other kids are going to want to buy that shoe. I mean, that's how this works. That's the influence that's out there, right? So I think that's one of the big pulls. And again, they want it to be competitive. They want to find the best teams to make it competitive. For the top tiers, okay? Again, for those secondary type tiers, you still have to get invited. So don't get it wrong. Like, you still have to have a reputation, but it's not like you're going to be on that second tier and your recruiting is going to be any different than if you were independent. I'll be perfectly honest with you. But if you're trying to find those, again, it's just being in front of those players in front of those coaches that are putting those teams together. But for some places, it's unfortunate. But if you're not in a state that's got a team that's affiliated, and you're not on the adjacent state to one of those or joining state, you can't get on because they're NCAA certified events for the most part. And so you're still following all the NCAA guidelines.
And maybe just to jump in on the adjacent state rule, what that is if NCAA will allow you to play in a tournament based on wherever the headquarters of your team is. So for us, we use Idaho for one of our groups. So you can have up to 3 players outside of the state that can play on that roster. So for Idaho, it touches Oregon, Washington, Montana. But if you live in Montana, there are no circuit teams that adjoin your state.
Correct.
So you're you're out of luck. You just don't even have that option. So that's what that adjoining, just to be clear what the adjoining state rule is and some of the limitations it provides.
And then you can also, obviously, we can, as a program, I can reach out to those circuits and inquire. And a lot of times, you get hey, join the, the silver or the UA Rise or whatever, and see if you can work your way up the ladder or whatever, which is great, but it can be difficult because essentially the players that are currently playing in that are trying to make it for the players behind them, right? So they're out there investing all that money, and you killed it. Congratulations. Well, you graduated, and now the next tier is coming in. And oh yeah, by the way, you were in Atlanta and nobody watched you play.
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation if you're not like a hotbed for a ton of high major players or whatever else. But I think what we've established is there's more than enough opportunities for both. If what you're going for is you're trying to get great exposure, if you're trying to have a great experience, you can accomplish that with both the shoe circuit or independent. I can tell you right now that we've had some minor opportunities in that direction. It's always worked out better for us to just stay independent and do our thing. But I know a lot of guys that are on the shoe circuit and love it as well. Yep. So I think it can be beneficial on both sides.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for listening. Great information. Hopefully that was helpful to everybody. If you do have questions, you can always reach out. If you look on the bottom of your screen, selectbasketballusa.com is our website, and you can find emails on there to send us questions if you have questions. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the channel. We'll be having another video coming up soon that will help you get notified when it comes on. With that, we will say thank you, and we will see you next time.